Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here and being part of this important discussion today regarding the COVID-19 crisis and the effects it is having and will continue to have on our arts locally. Karen, can you share there we go. Next slide, thank you. For some housekeeping, please note that all of your mics are muted. Your control bar is on the right and is controlled by the orange arrow at the top. You will see a question box in that panel that you can open up with the orange arrow, and you can type in your questions there at any time. We will record today's session and make it available to anyone who is interested. Next slide, please. For today's session, Simeon Bannister from the Community Foundation will talk about COVID, pre, during, and recovery planning for our local arts nonprofit partners, and will present an overview of an arts vibrancy map of our region that the foundation sponsored and was created by SMU's Data Arts Department. Additionally, we will welcome panelists who will talk about their own sectors representing theater, dance, music, festivals, and visual arts. We will close with a Q&A and discussion. So please, again, note the question box where you can put your questions, and we will present those questions to Simeon and our panelists. And with that, I will turn it over to Simeon. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks so much, Annette, for the opening and for getting us kicked off this morning. And thanks again to everybody for joining us. We certainly appreciate the time that you're taking, and we want to be efficient with it and move quickly. The premise for our discussion really is to talk a bit about what's going on in the arts community as it relates to COVID-19. But to set the stage for that, first we have to describe what was happening pre-COVID and just kind of a general understanding of the lay of the land. In order to do that, prior to the onset of this pandemic, we had been doing some work to really try to understand the arts ecosystem in Rochester, and we're able to benefit from some work out of Southern Methodist University, SMU, to create a arts map to demonstrate the vibrancy of arts in our region. Next slide. And so on this map, the data arts section at SMU helps to try to understand kind of regional vibrancy in arts, so where there's proximate arts activity, and then also to overlay that with other demographic data. This is a tool that we'll make available, and so keep an eye out for that. Next slide. And so what we really take from this tool, and upon closer examination, you'll also notice that in Rochester, we obviously enjoy a very vibrant arts community. One of the great things about the tool is that there's some comparative work between our community and other communities. Good, and you'll notice a lot of green on the map. We also have a lot of proximate offerings, and if you think of Rochester on a regional basis, obviously downtown Rochester is a hub of activity. And so one of the kind of ironies of the map is that you see neighborhoods that are all proximate to downtown as demonstrating a lot of vibrancy. And we know that to be the case, again, because of the offerings that we have. The challenge, of course, and this was true pre-COVID and certainly true now and what we anticipate post-COVID, was a question of accessibility. And we've been working with many partners on trying to engage this question of accessibility. One other theme that was really kind of evident to Annette and I as we have delved deeper working with partners, is really the kind of growing advocacy that's been happening in Rochester around the arts. As we've seen changes in government at both municipal and county level, we've also seen a reinvigoration of energy from the Arts and Cultural Council, from the Rochester Artists Collaborative, from Rock Arts United, Arts in the Loop, the M Group. And this kind of growing level of advocacy, I think, is going to be a key feature and a key resource that we have in managing in this COVID and eventually post-COVID environment. Next slide. So in the crisis, one quick bit of background is that, as many of you know, the Community Foundation and our partners at the United Way, as well as several other foundations, Ralph Wilson Foundation, ESL Charitable Foundation, Farish Foundation, and a myriad of other funders, the Health Foundation, came together to form the Community Crisis Fund. And the Community Crisis Fund has really been operating as a resource to sustain the nonprofit sector and to really provide for the needs that are emerging as a result of COVID. One of the fascinating dynamics of this challenge is that so much of the effort has really been focused on basic needs, food distribution, housing and shelter, hygiene, personal protective equipment, and those kinds of supplies. And so the dynamic there, of course, is that for arts organizations, that's represented a degree of deprivation because there are still needs that are emerging now. And so part of what we've attempted to do here is to really, again, have a better understanding of the arts ecosystem, but also to start asking some questions around organizational survivability and organizational sustainability. In order to ask those questions effectively, we went to identify some tools that we might be able to use. And so to do that, we'll talk a little bit about a tool called CUSP. And then many of you have received calls from us, have received the surveys that we've sent out to really make sure that we have a more detailed understanding, again, of the ecosystem and how organizations are surviving this crisis. Next slide. So the CUSP tool, the COVID-19 Urgent Service Provider tool, is a tool that is designed to help funders and donors and other partners to understand both the urgency and need, as well as the resources that are available to organizations in this moment, so that we can ensure that local residents and local communities are having their needs met. It's provided by a firm out of New Jersey called BCT Partners that we've connected with. And we're excited because this tool was really a critical piece in helping us, again, to understand the lay of the land in light of the crisis. Next slide. If you squint really closely, you'll see here a screenshot of the provider tool. And what you see moving from left to right is an organization description, a brief program description. This data is culled from 990 data that's been distributed by the Internal Revenue Service. And then there's some additional predictive analytics. There is some machine learning to continue to hone the product. Including making sure that organizations are kind of described correctly and listed correctly, recognizing that there are many organizations that, of course, span multiple categories and do a lot of different things. We continue to move forward. You have the headquarters location, and then the next column is the community need column. And this column is a particularly important one and an interesting one. I will not bore you with a detailed statistical description of what's known as the Area Deprivation Index. But what it attempts to do is to get at the relative accessibility or dearth of resources in a given community of a given type of program. And so this number attempts to score what the community's draw or need might be for a respective organization. So still some work to do there, but an interesting dynamic. There's some questions around community diversity that are posed here. And then the rest of the columns really focus on the expenses and that an organization has to deal with, the reserves that organizations have to try to manage those expenses, and then forecasted reserves relative to the crisis. So the idea here is to identify, again, reserves that are available for an organization to draw from, and how long those reserves might last in light of the circumstances. And then finally, the last two columns focus on the number of COVID cases and the number of COVID deaths by county. Next slide. So what we take from this tool is that across our 8-county region, this tool identifies 114 arts, cultural, and humanities based organizations. Of those 114 organizations, 48 of them have forecasted reserves of less than 3 months, would suggest that there are 42% of organizations that are demonstrating signs of fiscal strain. To hone in a little bit more closely in Monroe County, a subset is 84 organizations, 30 of those with forecasted reserves of less than 3 months, 35% signs of fiscal strain. And we can take this data and break it down in a number of different ways. We can group counties, we can look at individual counties, and then we're also doing some work with BCT to become even more granular in terms of how we're looking at this data. But the walk away here is that we have a significant number, 42% of organizations in the region that the Community Foundation covers at least, that are demonstrating signs of fiscal strain. And that means that there is an urgency, indeed a fierce urgency, to coming up with some interventions and strategies. Next slide. In addition to the CUSP tool, we also felt compelled to make sure that we were verifying the data that was coming out of the CUSP tool, because it was the most recently available IRS data, but still data from 2018. And so we wanted to confirm what we were seeing. And so Annette and our team started to call around and engage. And so we distributed a survey. And then in addition to surveys, we also then gave follow-up calls to get more texture and to get deeper understanding. These curated surveys helped us to understand things like liquidity ratios, the run rates that organizations had, and then strategies that organizations were using to try to manage and deal with the outputs of the crisis. After our calls, which we reached about 30 respondents in the region. Many had little or no reserves, and subsequently confirmed the data that was in CUSP, that about 40% of the folks that we talked to in our survey indicated that they were going to be experiencing significant operational strain. At the same time, we also recognized that there were some resources that were provided by the federal government through the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. And one of the things that was really clear there is that folks that had established banking relationships tended to be more successful depending on the bank that you use. And folks that did not, frankly, were not. And so there's an interesting dynamic and relates to equity that really kind of emerges as a meaningful challenge. It's also clear that one of the things that was really evident is that the Paycheck Protection Program, which covered payroll, it covers a forgivable loan, rent, and utilities, was insufficient, frankly, to deal with particularly the arts community. So there's some organizations and some sectors that tend to be really kind of resource focused in that way, and so it really is just payroll and rent. But for the arts community, the challenges, the financial challenges extend beyond payroll. And so there were concerns that we heard in the surveys about lost event revenue, about things like classes and field trips that would be canceled, about programs that would be disrupted, that the supply chain of artists, if you will, being able to supply and present work would be disrupted in terms of some of the bookings and that kind of offering. And so we recognize that there's still a significant gap that needs to be filled. that even some of the federal programming is incapable of filling at this point. Next slide. And so where that leaves us, as we get ready to turn towards our panelists, is really starting to kind of think through our kind of key next steps, and how, at least as a community foundation, working with other partners and government and in philanthropy, will attempt to try to engage this challenge. The first is that we want to make sure that we're modifying the CUSP tool, we're working with BCT, so that it more accurately reflects community need and it offers more specificity in the forecast. So what we want to do is take it a level deeper. And so the community need that was offered there, the ADI, again, without going into the weeds, really becomes a proximate measure for geography. And of course, geography is not the only way to understand how much a community draws on a resource. So we're looking at coming up with other ways to more accurately describe and define community need in this case. And then in terms of specificity of the forecast, kind of less than 3 months or greater 3 months is important to know, but we really want to get a little bit more granular so that we can start figuring out really who's at risk and where we need to prioritize interventions. In so doing, it gives us the room to be able to mobilize funds. We've already started conversations internally with donors, as well as with some of the field of interest funds that the Community Foundation manages, so that we can bring dollars together to begin our intervention. We'd also like to make sure that we are using the data and the information, the context and the relationships, so that it's informing the distribution of dollars. So again, we're coming up with really a smart, effective, and efficient way to get dollars to our organizations as quickly as possible. We'll continue to work with advocacy organizations like the Arts and Cultural Council. Particularly in the case of the Arts and Cultural Council, we're working to grow its capacity, and work is in progress now to update its website, its database, and look at some leadership for the council. But it's certainly not limited to the council. And so we're also looking at working with the other advocacy groups that I named earlier, the Rock Arts United, Arts in the Loop, and others, because this is going to be a key moment. Part of the challenge here is really a community prioritization that has to happen. And as we're focused on basic needs right now in this moment, and that's a key driver for the work, as we start to think intermediate term and longer term, one of the questions we have to ask is, what kind of Rochester do we want? What kind of community do we want to be as we emerge from this crisis? And it's going to be absolutely critical that, that we've done the work necessary to advocate for the arts and cultural sector, because it plays such a key role in our community. And then the last thing we'll say is that we want to make sure that we consider the ecosystem as a whole. And that includes the organizations, but also individual artists, teaching artists, working with some of the for-profit organizations that provide arts opportunities in Rochester, and really kind of taking the broad view. And so the tools that we've used so far primarily focused and rightfully and understandably in the nonprofit sector, but we do want to make sure that we're kind of casting a broad net and that we fully understand the dynamics. And so with that, we want to really inform this conversation with the perspectives of sector leaders and folks that are deeply knowledgeable. And so I'll turn it over to Annette to introduce our panelists who will offer some thoughts. Annette?
Yes, thank you, Simeon. And before we get to our panelists, I am also going to share a quick poll of our attendees. Hopefully you can all see it and answer the poll. I'll give it a couple minutes. We're collecting responses now. So my organization has sufficient reserves to survive 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, longer than 12 months. We had a sense of that with the surveys we've collected. I appreciate everybody who has completed those. Just give it another few seconds. And I'm going to close that and share our results. So of those who responded, 50% said they have 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12, 40%, and longer than a year, 10 months. So it shows we have some serious issues to address. Karen, can you share your screen again? While we're getting, oh, here we go. So we welcome our panelists. Thank you very much for being here today. Chris Manelli, Executive Director of Geva Theater Center, Hillary Olson, Executive Director of Rochester Museum and Science Center, Erica Fee, Producer and Executive Director of Rochester Fringe Festival, Kurt Long, President and CEO of Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Bill Ferguson, Acting Executive Director of Garth Bacon Dance, and Blue Cease, Executive Director of Rochester Contemporary Arts Center. Before they get started, Simeon, there was a question that, there were a couple questions actually that came in that I think would be good for you to address. One was, are we going to address the technology divide that exists? And I know that the foundation has been working on this.
So the answer is yes, we are. This has been really a crucial concern, and the interesting dynamic is that it registers in a number of different ways in the community. Initially, this conversation started around education and the shift to online learning and the inadequacy of resources for families, particularly our most underserved families. And then we started to realize, oh wait, that's the same thing in health and telehealth. Oh wait, that's the same thing in a number of different sectors. And so we've been trying to do some resource mobilization as well as do, again, some, a deeper dive in terms of data. What we knew before this is that, at least for Rochester City School District families, 2 out of 5 families did not have access to internet, or and 3 out of 5 did not have access to high-speed internet, which is pretty critical. We've mobilized some dollars to distribute MiFis and Chromebooks. We're working with the city of Rochester and United Way to distribute additional Chromebooks to families, and it's absolutely critical. That's certainly not the full extent of the effort, and there's some broader conversations in the community going on around how we can leverage some of what we have in that regard, so a little bit more effectively.
And this is something I think the panelists can also address when they talk, but there was also a question about the need to bridge silos in arts and culture, not only across the arts nonprofits, but across sectors such as social services. So that was another question that was raised. I don't know if you want to talk about that, or
I'll just briefly say, and then I definitely want to hear the panelists kind of discuss this issue. But just briefly say that we do anticipate, and we've done some work with the New York State Council of Nonprofits, NICON, to try to get a deeper understanding. There's a forecast for affiliations, a forecast for other partnerships that we anticipate, just frankly as a result of a constrained economic environment. And so we definitely want to be smart about that and try to think about how we leverage some resources. And we do have some in this community, a Causewave, Synergy Fund, some other resources. And so we want to come up with a smart way, I think, in this community of handling these challenges.
Okay, and with that, we'll turn it over to Chris. And when he starts talking, there's a little bit of a mix-up, and it'll show my name, but it's really Chris Manelli.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the Community Foundation for having this conversation today. Yes, I'm Chris Manelli. I'm the Executive Director at Geva Theater Center. And I'm going to talk about a couple things today, where Geva was when all this started, where we are now, and what the future looks like. Also want to be keenly aware that while I'm speaking about our organization, this is a huge impact to the whole arts and cultural community, from individual artists, from people who are not affiliated with organizations. So we have a lot of larger organizations here, but it really affects all of us. So that's a huge need when you think about it in Rochester, which is such a rich community in arts and culture. Where we were, so on March 13th, we had to close down 2 of our productions that were currently running that had some weeks to go. We luckily were able to stream some of those shows. We captured them on video, and we made a special arrangement with the unions for a 2-week window where we could put those online. We were really lucky to be able to do that. But we also had to stop rehearsals for our production of Looks Like Pretty, which was about to go on stage in just another couple weeks. We had to cancel or postpone another 3 productions for the rest of the season. So it was a huge impact on our earned revenue for the year. We've had to do lots of refunds out of that, certainly for folks where we couldn't deliver shows, though we had lots of folks that were our subscribers that donated their tickets back too, which was really heartening when we saw that. We've had to furlough staff at this point, about 20 of our full-time staff we've had to furlough, and another 30 are on reduced work right now. So that's challenging. But where we are now, so what we've done is we've actually turned ourselves into a little media company now, right? We're producing all our work digitally instead of live. So we've started a new podcast for our organization. We're collecting stories from folks for a future theater piece. We're creating education resources for students and teachers that are going to be freely available. Each Friday, we've been doing a thing called the Happiness Hour, a Facebook Live sort of variety show. And our staff has also been doing very practical sort of things they can do to help out in the immediate situation, making masks at home for doctors and hospitals. We also have put a lot of attention into our big fundraiser for the year. That's going to be happening on June 5th. It was supposed to be a gala where we all gathered. Now it's going to be virtual, but it's really important. So all our energy is going into that and to raising some funds for the organization. To speak just quickly about the future is a bit uncertain right now. It's really challenging to plan, as we don't know exactly what the steps will be going forward and when things will open up. So we're looking at lots of different scenarios for our organization. But it's clear that for a theater like ours, we're not going to be on the first groups to open up our organization again. We have a business that is built on gathering lots of people together to watch a show live, and that's not going to be something that's possible for quite a while. The health and safety of our patrons and our staff are paramount. So we want to make sure when we are able to open that we're able to provide that for folks so they feel safe, so they feel like they can come back and enjoy the work that we're going to provide. One of the big challenges for us as well is that as we have a subscription model, a lot of our work is pre-sold. And so that in usual times is great for us. We know we have a built-in audience for our shows. Right now, it's a challenging liability if we're not able to deliver programming. So that's one of the areas of concern for us looking forward. We know we need donations to keep carrying through. Our donors have been strong and have been really behind us in supporting, but they're going to need to continue that. And we're also thankful to those who've already stepped up to help us. And finally, I guess in my last 30 seconds here, we know that right now there's a sort of frontline emergency need that's happening in our community, and we're doing all we can to help with that. But as this goes through and we get to the tail end, our arts organizations are going to need some help as well, and we hope that there's resource left to do that because we are another way for our community to heal, different from the sort of healing that needs to happen right now. So with that, I'll finish up my 5 minutes. I'm happy to take questions later on, and once again, thanks for having me.
Annette, do you want me to just jump in? Okay, I'll go. I'm Hillary Olson, the president and CEO of the Rochester Museum and Science Center. Representing the museum community, although the museum community is really diverse. So when we think about what museums do, you have a high-touch museum like a children's museum or a science center where we are concerned about how much, where people are actually literally putting things in their mouth, maybe at the Strong Museum, and that's part of the natural exploration process, and touching all of the different bits and pieces in the Science Center. And then you have art museums, which maybe are a little bit easier to, they're naturally, typically hands-off, and people are not touching so much. So then the concerns about reopening go straight to, bathrooms and masks and things like that, but it's not about people touching your exhibits. The Rochester Museum and Science Center falls in between that. We have cultural galleries and Rochester history galleries and things that can be low touch situations, but we also have a lot of high touch activities, and we are working to figure that out. We have about, pre-closure, we have about 100 staff, full-time equivalents, but good, almost half of them are part-time people. 40 of the FTEs are part-time people who were essentially laid off. We had to lay off an additional 20 staff, and the remainder of us either have had our hours cut or our pay cut, or in most cases, both. I think it was important for me to take a pay cut and ask the board to do that. It helped me to talk to the rest of the staff about how we were cutting those things. Right now, we're concerned about, the biggest concern is what's the model? We've been scenario planning, best case scenario opening in June, worst case scenario opening in October. How many people are coming to what is essentially, and I think this is for all of us, what is essentially an elective activity, and people being deeply concerned about, are people going to gather in any way, shape, or form? Do people want to, as Chris said, become part of that healing process at a community organization where you don't have to go? Who's coming? Who's interested? Who's angry and wants to touch everything and not wear a mask? How will we be enforcing, all of the new rules and regulations, mask wearing? How will we be disinfecting and all of those other things? And then financially, the concern for museums is we don't typically, and this might not be true for everyone, but we don't always have the biggest endowments in the world. So, and our endowments, of course, as everyone else's, have dropped. Donors are moving towards health and human services, and rightly so. We need to take care of people before, their basic needs, before we can take care of their sort of existential needs. And we're planning on sort of how to emerge different, smarter, safer, but strong. And what is the museum of the future look like? And how do we sort of capitalize on some of the things that we've done well? We've started an online forest school program through the Coming Nature Center that is selling out. People are really interested in online nature education, which is almost an oxymoron, but they're in it. And I'm looking at taking care of my staff and how, who's got the skills to succeed, and how are we moving strategy? Any of those long-term goals and strategies are sort of out the window. And right now, purpose and mission is our new strategy. It is the core of what we do, and making sure that the board and the staff and the visitors understand what that core is, and that we all agree upon that before we move forward. And also, as we move forward, thinking about accessibility, what does it look like? How do we get people to come back in a comfortable way? How do we get maybe different people to enjoy the museum that haven't come before? And I think everybody's worried about that. And then, on a more practical level, and I think most of the arts organizations are dealing with this, but the museums in particular, are what happens when there are 0 field trips scheduled for next year. Many of us rely on field trips. For us, it's about 30% of our school year revenue comes from field trips and group visits. And if that's closer to 0 with only a few private schools coming in, then what does my staffing model look like? What is my purpose? What is my goal? And how do I create maybe, new and different outreach programs to go out into the community if people can't come here? I think that's a lot of talking, but sort of that covers where we are.
Annette, would you like me to go next?
Erica, you can go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully you can all hear me. So I'm Erica Fee. I am the festival producer and executive director of the Rochester Fringe Festival. We are New York State's largest multi-arts, performing arts festival. And this isn't a great time to run a festival. We not only do we have all the problems of performing artists and performing arts organizations, but we also have the problems of a festival. So we're dealing with a lot of challenges right now. Suffice it to say, on top of that, I have actually been personally obsessed with coronavirus since early January. So I feel like I'm almost an expert. I could go right to 2000 on Jeopardy now at this point. But anyway, let me just talk a little bit about the festival scene nationwide, worldwide, and locally, what I do know. As you are aware, all the large festivals are canceling: Edinburgh Fringe, Coachella, Glastonbury, Bonnaroo, Oktoberfest, go on and on. We received a call from the city of Rochester last week. They are not issuing any permits for any festivals prior to September 1st. Our festival is right on a knife edge because we start in late September. I've been in constant contact with Dr. Mike Mendoza and the New York State Department of Health, because it's the New York State Department of Health that actually regulates the large outdoor gatherings. And it's all too close to call. But I think that we're at the point of, let's be honest, as Chris said, large gatherings are not going to be permitted. Large outdoor mass gatherings are absolutely not going to be permitted, and they're not going to be permitted before there's an effective therapeutic or a vaccine. On top of that, there's the issue of performing arts venues. What do we do with venues? It's an aerosolized virus that we're dealing with. Is anyone going to want to sit amongst an aerosolized virus? And at what point can a venue operate? We know that the venues, when they are reopening, will not be reopening at 100% capacity. They'll be reopening perhaps at 30% capacity. 50% capacity would probably be generous on the part of New York State Department of Health. So at what point does it make it, financially viable for any of these venues to operate? Also, on top of that, will anyone attend even these venues, even if they're opened? There was actually a recent study amongst festival goers that showed that festivals, super fans, people who identify as #1 fans of festival, actually consider themselves the least likely to return to festivals prior to the vaccine. And once a vaccine is developed, they will change their minds, but prior to that, they're not going to go. So festivals obviously have, and we are a nonprofit organization, so our finances are a little different than some of the festivals in the Rochester area. But as a nonprofit, we of course rely on grants, but also on sponsorships. How can we rely on sponsorships if we can't deliver that in-person festival experience that brands are looking for? On top of that, we make so much of our money at one set point per year. So we have already furloughed staff, and we are looking to see where we can skimp and save. We are at the point, personally, of not knowing what's going to be happening in September. We were asked by Dr. Mendoza to hold off on any plans until mid-April. We talked to him at mid-April, and he said hold off on any planning until mid-May. But being a performing arts festival, our question is right now, even if people are allowed to gather in September, how on earth can they rehearse in July and August? What will the audience experience be if you have actors or musicians or dancers on a stage spewing virus into the crowd? How do we protect the artists from each other and from the audience? And also, what are the liabilities involved? Because the last thing we want is to open early and then find ourselves faced with a big lawsuit. So we have a lot of questions that are unanswered right now. We, like many festivals though, nationwide and worldwide, we're also working on a digital plan. And that does create all sorts of its own issues, of course, as many of you now know. But there is some interesting art that's coming out of some of these digital festivals. Of course, this gets back down to the model. How is this sustained? a lot of festivals at first were charging for tickets for these online festivals. Now most of them aren't, and they're operating a tip jar. How long can a festival and artists last with that sort of model? So unfortunately, my big takeaway right now is pray for a vaccine. That's the only thing that's going to get us out of this. Beyond that, we are just trying to, do what we can so that we can provide some arts access to patrons in a digital format and in a safe way.
Thanks so much, Erica. Kurt?
Hi, I'm Kurt Long. I'm the president and CEO of the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. I've been asked to talk about the music sector, but the music sector is obviously a vast array of different kinds of organizations and individuals. And I'm going to talk primarily about how the coronavirus is affecting the RPO and orchestras in general. Our core business is bringing together groups of musicians in close proximity on stage to play live concerts for audiences in close proximity within a concert hall. And obviously that's not something which is happening here in Rochester or with orchestras around the country or around the world right now. We did end up canceling 5 weeks of programs in very early March. Then we added another 5 weeks shortly thereafter. And shortly after that, we canceled through the end of our winter season, which was scheduled to end at the end of May. We've been telling audiences that these are postponements and we still hope to reschedule concerts at a later time. At this point, we've already been through several fully vetted rescheduling scenarios, and generally by the time we have one completed, it's time to conclude it's unrealistic and we need to start all over again. So like all of my peers, we're facing a lot of uncertainty about when a return to doing business will happen, what kind of restrictions we'll be operating under when that can be possible, and how long those restrictions will last. Like many of our colleagues, we're looking to take content digitally out to the world. The American Federation of Musicians, the Musician Union in New York, has eased many of the restrictions and many of the expenses that orchestras would normally face around sharing content digitally. The RPO, like many of our peer orchestras, we don't have a lot of that kind of content on the shelf ready to take out to the world. Whereas some of our orchestras do that kind of thing all the time and have archival tapes they can bring to the world. Our musicians are being very creative in terms of performing in their homes. We're in an interesting situation where our musicians can do a lot of things that we can't do because they're acting as individuals and we're bound by union contracts. We are looking, let's see, our musicians Saturdays at 5 p.m. are doing live performances out of their homes. And this week, tomorrow, we'll be posting that on our Facebook page instead of our musicians posting that on their Facebook page. And we're also partnering with WXXI, who's added some rebroadcasts of some of our subscription series concerts. And we've set up a live chat where our musicians and sometimes guest artists and conductors are talking about the programs as our audiences listen to them. Obviously, we're in the business of doing live concerts for live audiences, and transformation into an organization which for the time being is going to be sharing things digitally is a pretty big shift for us and something we're not particularly used to doing and not particularly good at doing, and it's a big change for the RPO. We face a lot of uncertainty about when we can get back to performing, what kind of restrictions we'll be facing and how long those restrictions will last. I was on a phone call with a group of 9 other orchestras earlier this week. Many of the orchestras in communities that have been hard hit by the virus are assuming that they will not get back to performing for live audiences until the fall of 2021. They're looking at an entire season of operating their business without performing concerts for audiences. Others are optimistic that we'll begin to perform concerts with restrictions in the coming months and thinking about what those restrictions will look like and how they'll impact our business model. We're assuming that when we get back to making music, initially it'll probably be online. Instead of having one musician doing a performance in their home, we'll have a point where we can get a group of musicians together in a space and tape and digitally share a performance. Today, the Berlin Philharmonic, one of the leading orchestras in the world, brought together a chamber orchestra in their concert hall in Berlin and socially distanced their musicians all throughout the hall and shared a performance that they streamed live to audiences. And that's the first orchestra to do that kind of thing since the shutdown started. So we see a little light at the end of the tunnel, maybe, in the fact that some of our colleagues in Europe were able to start doing that kind of thing. We're also we're concerned about musician health and about audience health. We need advice, and we're going to need health officials helping us figure out how, when we do start bringing people together, we can do so safely. We're thinking that if we do reach a point where we can start doing concerts, doing them outdoors in spaces where audiences can separate themselves and socially distance in a way that they're comfortable with is a lot more likely than packing people in a concert hall. We're also looking at if we reach a point where we can do concerts at the Eastman Theater, but only 400 or 500 people can be in the hall. Can we make that work? That obviously limits our revenues substantially, and we have to be able to do concerts that we can justify from a business point of view with limited revenues. In the short run, our biggest challenges are really, do people who normally donate to the orchestra going to continue to donate in this challenging time? We're heavily dependent on our annual fund. Donations support about 60% of the operating budget of the orchestra. Right now, we're not doing any concerts. We're projecting we'll lose about $1.6 million in revenues from early March to the end of July, and we're really going to depend on the annual fund. And then secondly, just like the Jiva Theater, we're heavily dependent on subscriptions. And normally we have lots of people buying their subscriptions for next season. While we have a few people sending in their money for subscriptions, it's really quite limited right now. People are looking for us to bring out a credible plan about when we're going to get back to doing concerts, and we just don't know the answers yet. So we're a business, we usually plan things long in advance in excruciating detail. And we really have to become a business that is reactive and wait and see when opportunities are presented, and then we move to take advantage of them in creative ways. So that's a little update on the RPO. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kurt.
you.
Appreciate it. Bill?
Bill, you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Well, first of all, thank you to the Rochester Community Foundation for all the support they give the region year after year through abundance and uncertainty. You know, Garfagan Dance started off with a bang this year. We had wonderful performances at the Eastman Theater with the RPO and Jeff Tyzik and the Pops Orchestra. And while it was an artistic success, the best part about it was the fact that we had 25 students of our Garfagan student ensemble perform live on stage with an orchestra. That's a memory that they'll take with them for the rest of their life. And it's unfortunate that the memories that follow them for the rest of their life this year will be the COVID crisis. I could go repeat some of the things that have been said that our arts organizations are struggling with now, especially performing arts organizations, and everything that we do depends on people gathering, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. So at Garfagan Dance, one of the things we're doing to try to mitigate that is we're, like everybody else, we're reaching out to our constituents digitally. We're offering public classes in Fagan technique online. We're planning a spring season, sort of a spring season online, where we're going to present works by Garth Fagan and Norwood Pennywell, and combine those with interviews of the choreographers and the dancers who help create the pieces, and hopefully we'll have some interesting surprise guests to pull people towards our offerings. One of the things that's unique about this time is we have an opportunity to really evaluate our strategic plan and vision towards developing a stronger plan of sustainability considering the situation that we're in right now. So we're using this time to take a deep dive into what we plan to do and how we plan to create our future. I want to save the time for questions and move forward, but we have also started social media fundraising to try and figure out a way to support ourselves through the upcoming months. We were fortunate, we were prepared for the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, when that became available, and we have been funded. So we have a little bit of financial space, but as with everybody, we're wondering, what are we going to do next? What's happening next? How do we maximize our digital offerings so that we can somehow raise the support that we need to raise when we used to have a school that would raise revenue for us, performances that would raise revenue for us, and ancillary things that we would do to help raise revenue for our company. Dance companies throughout the world that I've been noticing, everybody is doing everything they can to remain present by putting works online, works online that you hadn't seen before, works online that you've seen before, and talking to people. So you can expect dance companies and arts organizations to start doing things you never saw them do before. One of the things that has really made me aware of, while we've always planned to do some sort of digital thing, the responsibility falls on our marketing and development and on everybody in our small organization to figure out how to be relevant digitally right now. And organizations that have a digital administration are doing much better right now because they were positioned to do this. So that speaks to a need in the art sector to develop ourselves in terms of how we're going to use our online content. I could go on, but I'd just be reiterating the obvious, and I'll save it myself for any more questions going forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. And Blue?
Thanks, everyone. Honored to be here to talk a little bit about ROCO, first of all, and 3 other topics I wanted to cover quickly. There are a whole range of small visual art organizations that we work with, and to some degree, I'm going to try to speak to the impacts on them, and also perhaps I can speak as best I can to the impact on individual visual artists. Though we haven't conducted any, major surveys of that impact, and then an idea that we are working on to document and explore this impact of the health crisis and the shutdown on our community, and employing artists to create some kind of a major citywide WPA-style project to sort of emerge out of this whenever that will be. So those are the 4 things I wanted to touch on just briefly. First, rundown of impacts on ROCO, on Rochester Contemporary Art Center. We immediately closed the doors, of course. We had an exhibition planned for April and May, which we needed to cancel, obviously. So we were lucky to move that project to tentatively reschedule that to September. And what that does immediately is it basically places the expenses now with any potential revenue associated with that exhibition in another fiscal year in 4 months. So that's one immediate impact. Of course, our admission revenue for the immediate time goes to 0. Admission isn't a huge part of our revenue, but it is significant. What I noticed immediately, being a very small organization with an annual membership model and memberships arriving in the mail basically every day, we get some number of membership renewals and or new memberships typically. And this is an experience I remembered from the economic downturn, the Great Recession, what happens with us is, we might get a few checks, a few PayPal membership renewals every day, and immediately, almost overnight, those go to 50%. So, we have some really troubling forecasting there. And then maybe most impactful on us is the impact and the adjustments we need to make to our annual fundraiser and exhibition 66. This is a big project that we're basically in the run-up to promoting, to receiving the contributions for, and actually executing in June and July. We're fortunate in that it already had a significant online component kind of in the bag. So we can scale back to that. And that's what we've been focusing on, making sure that the online component of that important fundraiser works as best it can. I have a couple kind of projections here, taking into consideration PPP loan/grant support. I'm projecting that in 3 months, in part because this is a very critical time for us, that we're a month and a half into this shutdown. At the 3-month mark, I'm projecting that our annual revenue will have been impacted 15 to 19, 20%. So that's major for us as a small organization. So moving on to what I've observed with a few other of our partners and peers and collaborators in the visual art community here in Rochester. We organized First Friday, which is a citywide gallery night. And some of those venues are for-profits, but nonetheless, they really should be considered in this larger ecosystem that Simeon mentioned. A critical and integral part of our night scene, of our art community, and supporting artists. There's really no difference in some ways between the for-profit small art venue and the nonprofit small art venue, as the public is concerned, I should say. So other small venues are absolutely impacted similarly. And certainly by the end of the quarter, I think the for-profits and the nonprofits will have canceled some major event. As a general rule of thumb in our visual art programming world, the big focus in our world is the opening reception, right? The big party. And there's no hard and fast rule about this, but it's easy to assume that 50% of any project's upside, its attendance, its revenue, its art sales, its people in the door, it's all of those things. 50% of those things associated with an exhibition happen on opening night. So our sector is all about the big opening party. Well, we were just kneecapped in that way. So those are all the representative concerns. Tonight to restart First Fridays in a digital format. We're proceeding, 1 month at a time with that, and we'll see how it goes. We will sort of pass the mic in a big group Zoom from one small venue to the next, and we'll all have roughly 10 minutes to explore an artist studio, hear an artist talk, or walk through a vision with a curator. So that's the small venues. Individual artists have been in a whole range of different conversations with other small arts organizations across the state, and a few Zooms with other curators around the country. And what we're trying to convey as best we can is that in many communities, artists are some of the most vulnerable people in the art community overall. And in a way, this crisis is really unique. It's a double whammy for artists, because I'm sure other people on the panel can speak to this. Many artists have their day job, and their day job in many cases is in the entertainment sector, in the restaurant sector, and maybe a bartending job. So they were just hit twice as hard by this. So the impact on individual artists is really, really substantial. After this extended unemployment runs out, I'm really, really, really concerned of how artists are going to make this work. So that's definitely something we want to try to address. Should I continue a little bit about this concept that we're working on, Annette and Simeon?
If you can do it, real quickly, because we are at the 11:01 point, and we trying to stick to an hour. But if people have a few more minutes, we'll go a little bit over.
Absolutely. So, all of this considered, we want to push forward some kind of a project. We want to explore the possibility of our city creating a citywide exploration of this moment through the eyes of artists by supporting them in a hyper-local WPA influenced or informed initiative. We're working with RCTV, our partner, and a number of other past projects, and tentatively titling this project Emerge. And we're going to do a little town hall to discuss this idea with hopefully many of you, individual artists, other organizers, on May 9th at 2 p.m. So we don't know if this is going to be possible, but I really want to float the idea publicly. I really want to explore it and push on it, and then see if our philanthropy community and if our government leaders can get behind supporting artists at this time, and supporting artists in a way that really doubles down on the important role of the art community in our local economy.
All right, thanks so much, Blue. I'm going to try to launch one more poll, and hopefully people have better luck with this one. But PPP was mentioned, and the EIDL is part of the stimulus funding, federal stimulus funding, and so we just wanted to get a quick picture on that. So I'll leave that open another minute. I want to thank all our panelists. While the poll is open, I will say there was a question that I think panelists maybe can answer. I think some of you touched on this, but it was, how are you planning on handling membership or subscriptions in light of all the closures, extending membership terms, refunds? I know that those are options for a couple of the venues, but if there's anyone who wants to address that question.
And I can speak to that a little bit. This is Hillary.
Okay.
What we've decided to do, at first we were sort of ignoring it, thinking that we would be closed for 2 or maybe 4 weeks, but now that we know that that's been extended, we've offered our members 2 choices. One is to extend their membership by the amount of months that we are closed, and the other one is to donate those dollars back to us so that their membership will renew at the same time as it would have, which really has a huge impact on cash flow. I know that the theaters aren't able to do that as well as we are, but anybody that is sort of a ticket-based system, I think is asking for people to donate that back and seeing some success with that. Not huge, but it's some success.
Yeah, and this is Chris. I can share as well. So we offered some similar choices to folks, certainly giving them credit for future productions to put that forward. We did ask folks to donate if they could, but certainly understanding that everybody's situation is different right now, and some folks might not be able to do that. So, on our subscriber side, subscribers who have been connected to the organization for a long time were more willing to do donations and help us out, which we were very thankful for. Single tickets, that's more transactional, and a lot of those went back to refunds.
And hi there, this is Erica. We have decided to delay the sales of our tickets so that we're putting them on a sale as late as possible. There has been a lot of controversies with festivals nationwide not refunding tickets or asking people to roll their tickets over to the next year, which has actually hurt some of those festivals' brands. So that's something that we're looking to avoid too. We have messaged all of our artists and said that if we do need to cancel the festival and we have placed tickets on sale, the tickets would be refunded immediately.
Okay, thank you. And we have the responses to our quick poll. It looks like 67% of the respondents, the PPP and EIDL will help get through the crisis, and for 33%, it won't. And I know that there are some technical problems with everyone being able to respond. I apologize for that. Simeon, do you want to say any final comments before we close?
Yeah, again, just want to thank everybody. I see the question that Allison offered about kind of continuing to serve as thought partners with RACF, and we absolutely welcome the engagement. Our goal is always to work collaboratively, and so we'll be looking to come up with a little bit more formal way to do that. I think part of it is going to be through some of this work we described earlier with the Arts and Cultural Council in terms of trying to strengthen some of the digital and online resources that are there, including a message board, so that we're able to kind of, receive feedback and kind of keep a discourse going amongst, not just with us, but amongst each other. And so that's going to be absolutely critical. And I would keep an eye out for that. And then additionally, Annette's put on the screen contact information as we continue to do analysis and due diligence and structure, an opportunity for some funding that really makes sense and helps in a meaningful way. So please, we welcome it. I see a couple of questions about some of the tools that were offered. Keep an eye out at ACT Rochester and some other of the Community Foundation's website. And also, as we launch these tools, after we do some additional refining, we'll be blasting that out on the email via if you receive grant opportunities from us, then you are on the list to get this information. If you do not, if you visit racf.org and sign up for the grant opportunities publication, that adds you to the list. And so you'll receive access to all the tools. There's a retinue of questions that I know I had, some practical ones about how to communicate with government, how to how to prioritize funds, amongst other things. There'll be an opportunity for us to continue to try to answer some of these questions with our panelists. I think if we can, perhaps share some of those questions and get some of those back, we can look at either posting them online or doing some other way of distributing that information. And with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you for the panelists for being with us. I was kind of keeping my eye on there's a nice little tab in this webinar panel that says how many people have attended and who's attentive. And we had really great attentiveness numbers. So thank you to all the listeners that were joined and stayed with us today. And thank you to, I got to do this publicly, to Annette for the work that she's put in to bring all this together. And we look forward to ongoing collaboration and discussion.
Yes, thank you all for taking part. This is obviously a discussion that will continue. We will follow up on the questions. Thank you for those questions. And please be sure to complete our post-webinar survey and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.